Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, May 28th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 965 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll be joined by analyst Mouin Rabbani to talk about the International Criminal Court, the pursuit of justice for victims of the genocide, and the broader challenges faced by the Palestinian national movement. Later on in the program, Jon will cover week 12 of the battle in South Lebanon, where Hezbollah drone operations continue to vex the Israeli military and exact a costly toll on both vehicles and soldiers, with casualties that include Israel's top armored brigade commander. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine and Lebanon. Israel escalated its attacks on Gaza this week, killing Palestinian children, men, and women, as its army bombed dozens of villages in Lebanon and issued a forced displacement order for an entire region in the south. In central Gaza City on Wednesday night, as families tried to celebrate the first day of Eid al-Adha, Israel carried out a massacre with an airstrike on a residential building, killing at least 10 Palestinians, 5 of them children, and wounding at least 18 others. Footage from journalist Salah Ziara shows the building on fire, with children being pulled from the wreckage and others laying on stretchers in ambulances. A witness at the scene described how families were gathered together when missiles suddenly rained down on them, leaving bodies, body parts, and wounded people scattered around as civil defense and ambulance crews struggled to pull the injured from beneath the rubble. Israel carried out a series of airstrikes on Gaza City on Tuesday, killing at least 3 people and wounding nearly 24 others. The Electronic Intifada's contributor Mohammed Assad filmed the scene in the aftermath of an Israeli attack on the Rimal neighborhood of Gaza City as crowds of people poured into the streets. Mohammed Oda, who was just appointed the commander of the Qassam Brigades, Hamas's armed wing, was killed in a strike on a residential building along with his wife and 2 sons. Oda replaced Izzeddin al-Haddad, who was assassinated in an Israeli attack last week. Jon will have much more on the assassination of Mohammed Oda later on in the program. Israel also attacked the Maghazi refugee camp on Tuesday in central Gaza, killing at least 5 Palestinians, including a 25-year-old photojournalist, Fadi al-Maghari. Al-Maghari was killed in an Israeli drone strike after an Israel-backed armed militia entered the camp and caused residents to panic. Witnesses told Dropsite News that people were attempting to flee through a narrow passage when the strike killed 5. Dropsite's contributor Mohammed Ahmed interviewed an eyewitness who said that the attack was a repeat of an incident in April, when at least 10 Palestinians were killed in a raid by the Israeli army backing the collaborator militia. Quote, "As usual, the militia raided the residential area of al-Maghazi camp," he said. "This is the second time that the militia has entered this area. People left their houses to see what was happening because there was a high intensity of fire. The army started firing and the troops started shooting," the witness said.
هذه الميليشيا خشت على المنطقة الشرقية لمخيم المغازي. هذه المرة الثانية الميليشيا بتخش في هذه المنطقة. الناس طلعت على باب الدار تشوف ايش في، لانه كان كثافة نار عالية، بقت الجيش يطخ وبقت القوات تطخ، بالاضافة انه المدفعية بقت تستهدف. فجأة ضربوهم صاروخ زنان، استشهدوا 4 شباب و3 في حالة خطيرة.
On Monday, Israel used 2 helicopter gunships to attack tents for displaced people in the Mawasi area of Khan Yunis. The attack killed a 6-year-old child, Muna Abu Libda, who was recovering from a broken arm. Footage of Muna's father in agonizing grief, mourning over her small body, was filmed by reporter Mahmoud Bassam. A 31-year-old woman, Hanan Abdel Nasser Mahmoud, was also killed in the strike. Local reporters say that she was breastfeeding her newborn baby when she was killed. Her infant, Mohammed, was severely injured and required emergency amputation on his little left leg. Journalist Ibrahim Mohareb captured footage of Mohammed in the hospital. Reports say that his leg was buried with his mother's body. A 15-year-old child, Fatima Mohammed Abdul Hadi al-Khatib, was in critical condition from the same Israeli attack and died the next day from her injuries, according to the Wafa news agency. Israel attacked the Nuseirat refugee camp on Monday night, according to Wafa, forcing families out into the streets. Photos by Mohammed Kadoha show small children carrying even smaller children in their arms. The next morning, journalist Fadel Imgari documented extensive destruction Israel inflicted on the camp following airstrikes that targeted 2 residential blocks. Israel attacked Nuseirat early Sunday morning, killing 3 Palestinians, including a couple and their baby, a 1-year-old named Osama. Also on Sunday, a Palestinian man was killed by Israeli gunfire in Jabalia in northern Gaza. And the body of an 8-year-old boy, Hani Abdullah Shakshak, was found inside a tent in northwestern Gaza on Sunday after he was injured and reported missing following heavy Israeli shelling. The boy had apparently been wounded in the shelling and ran to a nearby tent, seeking safety and help from others. People had already fled the area, according to reporters, and Hani remained inside the tent alone and injured, and eventually bled out. Reporter side Hezbollah captured footage of Hani's father mourning his son after his body was found. After a long search that lasted nearly 24 hours, Hezbollah stated, quote, his family lived between fear and hope, searching for him everywhere, but he remained alone inside the tent, bleeding until he succumbed to his injuries and was found martyred.
هذا شباب قتل من استشهاد امبارح بموقع 17.
Israel continued to target and attack Palestinian police and security forces this week, intending to spread disorder and chaos throughout Gaza. On Saturday, 5 police officers and personnel were killed when Israel bombed a police post with at least 2 missiles in the Al-Tuam area in northern Gaza, according to the General Directorate of Police. Gaza's Interior Ministry stated that Sabar Abdul Rahman Jarboa, a child bystander, was also killed in the strike. The ministry said that Israel has killed 42 police officers and personnel since the start of the so-called ceasefire in October 2025, in yet another flagrant violation of what Israel agreed to, and with total impunity. Quote, the occupation would not have been able to commit this bloody massacre were it not for the silence of the mediators and the international community regarding the occupation's ongoing crimes against the police and civilians in the Gaza Strip, the Interior Ministry stated. Reporter Abdel Sabah filmed footage of those killed and wounded in the Israeli attack being taken to the hospital. The Gaza government media office said that as of Wednesday, and since the fraudulent ceasefire came into effect nearly 8 months ago, Israel has committed more than 3,000 grave breaches and violations of the agreement. At least 910 Palestinians have been killed, more than 2,700 have been injured, and at least 82 have been abducted by Israeli forces. Furthermore, only 36% of the agreed-upon amount of humanitarian and relief aid have reached Gaza, and only about a third of all humanitarian and medical evacuation permissions have been granted, marking, the media office says, quote, a clear continuation of the policy of restriction and the obstruction of humanitarian movement and travel. And new analysis by Forensic Architecture, published in Dropsite News, says that Israel has built more than 25 kilometers of earthen barriers inside Gaza since the so-called ceasefire. Israel has been fortifying military bases in the eastern part of the territory it controls and constructing a physical barrier walling off Palestinians from most of the Gaza Strip, according to the research, which draws on satellite imagery and other data. In January, findings by Forensic Architecture showed Israel had begun constructing berms, which are large, raised mounds of earth, to create a physical separation between the area it controls and the area the Palestinian population has been forced into, Dropsite reports. Quote, the latest findings show that the berms have been extended to create a mostly unbroken wall. Much of the berm runs west of the Yellow Line, going even deeper into Palestinian territory. In places like Jabalia, the Israeli military has created a buffer zone along the Yellow Line, destroying everything in a 300-meter vicinity and creating an effective no man's land west of the line. Abdejawad Omar, an assistant professor at Birzeit University in the West Bank and a guest on the Electronic Intifada live stream, told Dropsite News that, quote, this is the danger of reading the ceasefire as an event rather than as a phase. It allows the slow violence of fortification, encroachment, and engineered uninhabitability to proceed under the cover of a word that promises its end. This is the whole grammar of settler colonial space in miniature, Omar added. The line is never where the line is said to be. The yellow line, like the green line before it, like every cartographic fiction Israel has authored, exists in order to be exceeded. It is drawn not to mark a limit, but to generate the next transgression of that limit. Control of 53% becomes control of 60%, becomes the buffer that eats 300 meters more. Dropsite adds that Israel has also fortified newly constructed military bases along the Yellow Line, the analysis shows, by clearing the surrounding rubble, paving roads leading to the bases, adding new structures, and building even higher berms as a protective wall around the bases. There are a total of 38 Israeli military bases east of the Yellow Line that are currently operational, according to Forensic Architecture. The higher berms are flattened on top, creating a walkway for patrol and surveillance. An image posted on May 8th shows a new Israeli military base at what was the Bani Suheila roundabout in Khan Yunis, a new built-up area amidst a complete moonscape of rubble and flattened earth. The report says that it has a high berm perimeter, paving, and security towers. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces killed a Palestinian man, Nasser Ali Kamel al-Sadi, in the Jenin refugee camp on Tuesday. The army had invaded the camp and shot al-Sadi in the thigh, causing him to bleed out before paramedics could reach him, according to the director of the Jenin Governmental Hospital. Also on Tuesday, a 13-year-old Palestinian child was attacked and injured by Israeli soldiers during a raid into the town of Bani Naim near Al-Khalil. The Palestine Red Crescent Society said its teams transported the boy to the hospital after he was shot with a rubber-coated bullet. In Masafariyata, Israeli settlers attacked Palestinians, vandalized their property, and cut down trees in one of the villages, while Israeli forces shot Palestinians with stun grenades during the attack. A 16-year-old child, Mohammed Aziz al-Hatalin, was injured, according to the Anadolu news agency. Further north, Anadolu reported settlers invaded the village of Salem near Nablus and attempted to set fire to agricultural crops during the peak harvest season, but residents managed to extinguish the fire before it spread. On Wednesday, also in Masafariyata, an Israeli settler attacked a Palestinian mother and her child in the hamlet of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 al-Merkez. An eyewitness said that The settler physically beat up the mother and her child after breaking into her family's home. Israeli forces assaulted a man during a raid on the Zawata area west of Nablus, according to the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Israeli settlers beat a Palestinian man and sprayed him with pepper spray in Beita, south of Nablus, while nearby the Israeli army stormed the village of Awarta, firing tear gas, stun grenades, and live ammunition. A similar raid was carried out in Al-Mughayr, near Ramallah, according to the Wafa news agency. Meanwhile, the Israeli government announced that it intends to build a defense ministry complex, including an Israeli army museum, a military recruitment office, and an office for the defense minister inside the compound that belongs to UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. The compound, which is in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem, was seized and stolen by Israel in January. This is the latest in a series of escalatory attacks on the agency. Israeli media reported that the UN warned Israel that the continued seizure of the compound could invoke a provision that allows legal disputes between the UN and member states to be referred to the International Court of Justice in The Hague. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric remarked that, quote, UNRWA is an integral part of the United Nations, and the UNRWA Sheikh Jarrah compound remains United Nations premises. These unprecedented and escalatory measures against UNRWA are a breach of the inviolability of United Nations premises. Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, shrugged off the warnings and said that Israel, quote, will not be deterred by legal threats. In Lebanon, more than 50 people were killed in a 36-hour period between Tuesday and Wednesday alone, as Israel escalated its rampage of the south. On Tuesday, on the eve of the Eid holiday, Israel carried out more than 110 airstrikes across more than 20 towns and villages in southern Lebanon and the western Bekaa Valley, according to local journalists. Entire residential blocks were flattened, including in Burj al-Shamali, the Palestinian refugee camp on the outskirts of Tyre in southern Lebanon, with a child pulled bloodied from the rubble. For more on the situation on the ground in Lebanon, our contributor Rokhaya Shamsuddin filed this report for the Electronic Intifada on Wednesday evening.
This is Rokhaya Shamsuddin reporting for the Electronic Intifada. Israel has launched a massive coordinated aerial assault across southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley in recent days, striking dozens of towns and villages in relentless waves with no end in sight. The latest escalation features an intense campaign of bombardment alongside sweeping forced displacement orders targeting the historic coastal city of Sur, its surrounding neighborhoods, and adjacent Palestinian refugee camps. In less than 24 hours, Israeli forces conducted over 180 airstrikes against more than 60 villages and towns in South Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, signaling a drastic expansion of its attacks. The human toll of this relentless bombing campaign continues to mount rapidly, with over 3,000 victims of Israelis' aggression since the 2nd of March, and at least 30 people killed, many of them women and children, across the southern region and Bekaa in a single day. In the village of Shukin in South Lebanon, an Israeli airstrike completely destroyed a residential home, wiping out 3 members of the Hashim family, a father, a mother, and their son. Additional heavy strikes have targeted towns deeper inland, including 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in the city of Nabatiyah, as Israel systematically targets civilian infrastructure and residential quarters in an effort to inflict as much damage on the native population as possible. These forced displacement orders, coming on the heels of one of the deadliest and most intense periods of bombardment in recent weeks, have triggered a fresh wave of displacement among residents who have already survived months of Israeli attacks. For the people of Sur and the neighboring Palestinian refugee camps, who share a long, interconnected history of resisting Israeli occupation, this latest offensive is viewed not as an isolated act of Israeli aggression, but as a continuation of a collective struggle for liberation and survival against a U.S.-backed colonial campaign designed to strip them of their connection to the land of South Lebanon. with the Israeli military suffering mounting casualties on the border. Many suspect that Israel may soon expand its campaign of terror to Beirut. On the ground in South Lebanon, invading forces are being repeatedly bogged down in fierce, close-contact battles with resistance fighters and targeted by devastating Hezbollah FPV drones. Unable to deliver on its political promises to safely return northern settlers or crush the resistance, the Israeli command appears increasingly likely to resort to punitive, large-scale bombings of the capital to mask its operational failures and lack of strategic progress.
That was Rokhaya Shamsuddin reporting for the Electronic Intifada from Lebanon on Wednesday. We've published many features in the last week, but today we're highlighting Endless Displacement, Endless Nakba by Malak Hijazi, writing from Gaza. Hijazi profiles Palestinian refugees, a woman in Gaza, a woman in the West Bank, and a woman in Lebanon, all three of them struggling to return home to historic Palestine. In Lebanon, Liliane Samraoui, a journalist who reports on Palestinian refugee camp life in Lebanon, tells us about her roots in Al-Kabri, a village in northern Palestine near Akka. Liliane was born in a refugee camp in Beirut, growing up in Burj al-Barajne, where the streets are narrow and infrastructure is hazardous, Hijazi writes. Quote, her family's story of dispossession and dislocation has been passed down through the generations. How they left, how they lived in tents, and how their land was stolen from them. She has never seen it. She wouldn't be allowed. In Gaza, 84-year-old Nakba survivor Jamila Abu al-Qumsan tells Hijazi that she still remembers being lifted onto a mule when she was 5. They came quickly, she told the Electronic Intifada. There was shooting and killing. People were afraid. The village emptied. We left with a pot and some clothes. That was all. She and 2 of her brothers were too young to walk. Their parents followed on foot. They left their village of Der Sunaid behind, which she remembers as full of orchards and vineyards. Beautiful. The village just north of the current boundary of the Gaza Strip has a recorded history that dates back to the late 16th century, when its 66 inhabitants paid taxes on a number of crops. Der Sunaid was known for its wells and fields of oranges, okra, and sugarcane. One of Jamila's older brothers, Tawfiq, would wake before dawn, load the harvest onto a mule, and take it from the village to Gaza's markets. In October 1948, Israeli forces bombed the village and took control of the area. By the end of that month, or in early November, all residents had been forcibly displaced. Jamila has never returned. The Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, happened over 1947 and 1948, when around 2/3 of the Palestinian population at the time were displaced from their homes, lands, and country, 750,000 of them winding up as UN-registered refugees. It is commemorated on May 15th every year and is often understood as a single exceptional moment in history. It has not been. The United Nations describes what followed as an ongoing process of dispossession and displacement through settlements, evictions, land confiscation, and home demolitions, one that continues to the present day. Jamila's family first settled in Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip with relatives. She later moved to Nuseirat, where she lived with her brother's family while her parents remained behind in Beit Lahia. She remembers living in a tent in a camp where shelters were numbered and families were assigned plots. It was like now, she told the Electronic Intifada from her son Mohammed's apartment in the Al Nasser neighborhood of Gaza City, where she currently lives. Her body, she said, could no longer bear the strain of having to live in a tent. When the Israeli bombing reached Sheikh Radwan in October 2023, buildings began collapsing on residents. She called her son Alaa, a doctor at Al-Quds Hospital, Jamila told the Electronic Intifada, and told him she was scared. He urged her to come to the hospital, even though it was already full of displaced families. She left with her daughter, Nahed, 43, who is unmarried and lives with her, taking nothing, not even a change of clothes. when the Israeli military issued evacuation threats against the hospital and struck areas around it. Jamila and her daughter moved south to Al-Qarara, a small town just north of Khan Yunis. After about a month, however, that area also came under attack. They were trying to drive us out, she said. What followed was a series of short-term moves as they got pushed around Gaza, trying to stay ahead of Israel's outsized violence. They lived with relatives, then in a single room with acquaintances for nearly 2 months, then in a rented apartment in central Gaza. When Jamila returned to Gaza City in January 2025, her home was gone. I lost my mind, she said. 75 years after her first displacement, she had been displaced again, just like the first time, and endured another series of displacements. She now lives in a rented apartment with her son Mohammed and his family of 7 in the Al Nasser neighborhood of Gaza City. She says she feels trapped inside as the apartment is on the 5th floor and she is unable to go up and down the stairs. But she added, it is still better than living in a tent. This is a major Nakba, she said. No home, no belongings, no place to sit. We are lost. Our lives are gone. She tells her grandchildren that what they are living through is worse than the first Nakba. She was 5 when she was first lifted onto that mule. She is still being displaced. Those are excerpts from Endless Displacement, Endless Nakba by Malak Hijazi, writing from Gaza on electronicintifada.net. And now, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and reclamation across Palestine and around the world. In Gaza, music teacher Ahmed Mouin Abu Amsha introduced us to his new student, 6-year-old Hala. He says, quote, when she sings, you can hear innocence, softness, and the beautiful spirit of a child in every note. I was truly happy when I heard her voice for the first time. So we sang together, and I decided the world deserves to hear her too. Look at how small she is. Look at how beautiful her soul is. In the middle of everything happening around us, Gaza, children in Gaza still carry music inside their hearts.
Once again, this is Hala. Hala, she's 6 years old. Sitta. So she is the sister of Bayan.
Hi,
So she
Rihan.
has a beautiful voice. So I'm gonna let you hear her voice. يلا يا نمي. صح.
شوق من نومك وبقلبي تعطف لا يوم يخلص ولا يومك إلا بلقاك يا حبيبي تعرف الحب أيامه ونوايك يناموا داخل حبك وكلامه وداخله قلبك يا حبيبي
صحاك
شوق من نومك وبقلبي تعكك في نومك لا يوم يخلص ولا يوم إلا بلقاك يا حبيبي تعيش الحب أيامه ونوايك داخل حبك وكلامه وداخله قلبك يا حبيبي
زمان صح. اكسر بتجنني.
And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague, Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora, and Eid Mubarak to everybody who is marking the occasion. It's hard to say happy Eid when we witness the horrific Eid massacres in Gaza and in Lebanon, which I think Israel deliberately escalates on Eid in order to emphasize its cruelty. But nonetheless, people in Gaza and in Lebanon are celebrating as they do. They try to go on, and you just can't help but smile when you see Hala, just beautiful, and hear her voice, absolutely extraordinary.
I gotta admit, it was really hard to find the sometimes it's the hardest part of the whole the whole report that I make, finding those videos or photos of glimmers of joy. But they're there. Of course, they're there.
They're there.
And
I had occasion over the Eid to exchange messages with a lot of our friends and colleagues in Gaza, and just to catch up with a few people there, and people are going through extraordinarily difficult times, but they are living. They emphasize this. They're not mere, of course, people are trying to survive, but they're not just trying to survive, they're trying to live. So she was great. Absolutely. It's absolutely great to hear that and to see that resilience despite the ongoing genocide and siege.
Yeah. And I was able to tune in to the weekly Doctors Against Genocide webinar that happens on Sundays last weekend. And Ahmed Mouin Abu Amsha was the featured guest at the beginning of the program. And he was talking about why he does this work, why it matters to continue to teach children music and to play music and to it's really an affirmation of humanity. It's an affirmation of just being able to stay alive, and not just alive, but to be fully human and experience joy and community. And so it was really beautiful. I think they record every webinar, so I encourage people to go back from last week's program. It was wonderful to see him. So yeah, I appreciate his work so much.
And I'll just say, leading into the next segment, how angry it made me listening to the comments of the UN Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric. Israel is occupying the UNRWA headquarters and planning to turn it into an office for the defense minister, the minister of genocide.
The genocide army.
It's such a brazen attack on the UN. They're like, oh well, maybe we'll refer it to the maybe we'll do something.
Here's our strongly worded letter.
Just absolutely disgusting. Imagine if any other country behaved that way. And they're not. It's not just the UN headquarters. Of course, Israel has attacked all of UNRWA's schools, health centers, of course, in Gaza during the genocide, but in Jerusalem as well, in occupied Jerusalem, shutting down schools and trying to Zionize and Judaize the city and all of the institutions and deprive Palestinians of any support or any independent cultural existence. And they just get away with it. And you see, you can go online any day to the social media accounts of all the European embassies cavorting with these killers and criminals and carrying on with their joint projects with Israel while shedding a few crocodile tears now and again for Palestinians. It's so disgusting.
It is depraved.
I wake up every day as disgusted and outraged as the day before. It never lessens.
No, it just deepens.
It's what gets me out of bed, frankly.
Right. We are motivated by pure rage. Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of which, we have a really interesting interview that we did with analyst Mouin Rabbani, where he talks about the efficacy, or maybe lack thereof, of the United Nations to hold Israel accountable, especially in places like the World Court. So really incredible interview. And let's go to that, and then we'll be back with John.
You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Ni'mah, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. Earlier this month, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that prosecutors at the International Criminal Court in The Hague are asking judges to approve arrest warrants for the ultra-far-right Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, along with another official and 2 Israeli military officers. So far, there has been no confirmation from the prosecutors. Since the start of Israel's genocide in Gaza in October 2023, the ICC has publicly confirmed arrest warrants for only 2 Israelis, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. But the court's procedures also allow arrest warrants to be issued under seal, so it remains possible that additional warrants exist but have not yet been made public. Joining us now to discuss these and other developments related to Palestine is Mouin Rabbani. He is a non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, a researcher, analyst, and commentator specializing in Palestinian affairs in the region more broadly, and he's co-editor of Jadaliyya. Mouin is also the author of the forthcoming book, Gaza Apocalypse. Welcome, Mouin.
Thank you very much, Ali and Nora. It's great to be with you.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Mouin. The ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan has been on extended leave for the last year following allegations of sexual misconduct. Khan consistently denied wrongdoing, and he's reportedly been completely exonerated. According to media reports, he could return to his duties very soon. Many people see the accusations against him as politically motivated. But after news broke that he had reportedly been cleared, you wrote the following. You said, now that Karim Khan has apparently been cleared of criminal conduct, he should do the honorable thing, resign, and make room for a prosecutor genuinely committed to the job, one who will pursue war criminals rather than appease the powerful. Khan has apparently not committed a criminal offense, and it is clear Israel played a central role in this scandal. Nevertheless, he has brought his office into disrepute and should go. Mouin, why do you come to that conclusion? After all, isn't Karim Khan the first and only prosecutor in the court's history to bring indictments against Israelis for crimes against Palestinians? And if the reports of the new arrest warrants are true, isn't that a result of the process he started?
Well, it's a very good question, and allow me to respond by providing a bit of background. When the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, was in the process of leaving, and the new prosecutor had to be elected, because a prosecutor is elected by a vote of what is known as the Assembly of State Parties, basically states that have ratified the Rome Statute and are members of the International Criminal Court. There were several candidates. Khan's main rival was, I believe, from Ireland or New Zealand, an individual known for their commitment to the court and to the work of the court. Khan, who is a British barrister, his candidacy was very strongly supported, not only by the British government, he was, after all, one of their citizens, but particularly by two members who are not members of the International Criminal Court, but who consider it their business to elect the next prosecutor. And I'm speaking, of course, about the United States and Israel. And they left no stone unturned to ensure that Khan would be elected. They succeeded. And in his first briefing to the United Nations Security Council, he reports every 6 months, I believe, to the Security Council about ongoing cases before the ICC that have been referred to him by the Council. He made a rather remarkable statement. And here, let me just back up. There are three ways in which a case can be taken up by the ICC prosecutor. The first is referral by the Security Council, which in the case of Palestine, of course, would never happen because of the US veto. The second is at the request of a state that is a member of the ICC. And the third is that the prosecutor can himself initiate a case by seeking permission from a panel of ICC judges to pursue a case. And two cases in particular, what is known as a situation in Palestine, which is what we're discussing now, and another one known as a situation in Afghanistan, are both cases that were not initiated as a result of the Security Council referral. Now, this is important because in his first briefing, of the Security Council. It was a briefing about a case in Libya. Khan went out of his way to inform the Security Council that henceforth he would be prioritizing only those cases that had been referred to his office by the Security Council. Now, one doesn't have to read particularly carefully between the lines to understand that Khan was providing assurances to Washington in particular that they no longer needed to worry about progress in the case concerning Afghanistan and crimes committed by US forces in that country, and particularly about the ongoing investigation into Israeli crimes in Palestine. That was his position until February 22, when Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia is also not a member of the International Criminal Court, nor for that matter is Ukraine. And the Security Council certainly did not refer that question to his office because Russia would have vetoed it. Nevertheless, at a speed considerably faster than either the speed of lightning or the speed of light, Karim Khan set up a massive investigation in Ukraine. He set up a whole team in Ukraine consisting of, I think, some 40 investigators. And within the space of a year, had indicted the head of state of Russia and another Russian official. So it took him less than a year to indict the head of state of a permanent member of the Security Council. And he was, of course, basking in the glory of doing the West's bidding. Then something very inconvenient for him happened, namely October 7th and the subsequent Gaza genocide. And if you remember, when he first started issuing statements about this, and he traveled, I think, at one point to Sinai and to Rafah, and then visited Israel, essentially at the invitation of the Israeli government, and made statements that were so outrageous that Palestinian human rights organizations refused to even meet with him when he tried to meet with them in Ramallah. What happened is that Israel forced his hand. The genocide was so public, so visible, so brazen. Israeli soldiers and commanders and leaders were bragging about their genocidal conduct 24/7. His office was being inundated with requests and demands for action, particularly by a number of ICC members from the Global South. And I think what ultimately tilted the balance was that his peers, reputable members of the British legal establishment, also began knocking on his door and saying, well, don't you need to do something? And it was in this May, I believe, of 2024 that he issued those indictments. And if you recall, he sought, the way it works is the prosecutor himself doesn't indict people. He sends a request to a panel of 3 judges recommending an arrest warrant for a particular individual. They review and study it, and then they either approve or reject the request. And Khan, of course, went out of his way to seek arrest warrants for 2 Israeli and 3 Palestinian leaders, lest he be misunderstood. And he also, surprisingly, went very public about what he was doing, which immediately gave Israel an opportunity to, along with the United States, then still under the Biden administration, to launch an extensive campaign against him, against the ICC, and all the rest of it. So that's kind of the background. Khan acted because his previous conduct and Israeli conduct tied his hands and left him with no choice. I remain convinced that left to his own devices, nothing would have happened because, the investigation into Palestine was lagging very far behind that into Russian conduct in Ukraine, even though it was years older. Then we get this sexual misconduct scandal, which is indisputably the result of Israeli machinations, regardless of what actually did and didn't happen. Khan was investigated by an organization known as OIOS, which is essentially the UN's investigative service, and it cleared him of criminal conduct. In other words, he did not commit a criminal offense in these relationships that he purportedly had. In any other investigation, being cleared of criminal conduct is kind of the end of the story, because that's the only issue that concerns the investigators. In this one, very surprisingly, the Assembly of State Parties, essentially the most prominent Western states that are ICC members, took a decision to continue the investigation into Khan, already knowing that he could not be charged with any criminal conduct, but seeking to determine whether he had brought his office into disrepute through these relationships or, other conduct unbecoming. And that's, I think, quite clearly, again, payback for this investigation into Palestine. Now, we do have these reports of additional warrants, and Ali, as you mentioned, the ICC can, or the prosecutor can also seek warrants under seal so that the person involved is unaware of any potential arrest warrant. But in this case, and given how heavily monitored and infiltrated the ICC is, I've absolutely no doubt that if there is an arrest warrant under seal, you and I would be the second to know about it. And, he has dragged his feet. He, in my view, has refused to energetically pursue his mandate for transparently political reasons. And I think it would be best that he be replaced by someone who will pursue justice, who will seek to implement the mandate of the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court without fear or favor, and stop playing politics.
But given how he got there, which is that he was selected or elected precisely because that's what they wanted him to do, and as you say, he only issued the indictments against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, really kicking and screaming because he would have had no credibility left if he
Precisely.
Fair enough. But given the reality, if he were to resign tomorrow, what gives you any confidence that he would be replaced by someone any more willing or any more aggressive in pursuing that mandate?
Well, of course, there is absolutely no assurance that Khan's successor, were he to depart tomorrow, would be more energetic than he has been. My argument is that he really has compromised his office by refusing to do what's right. He's issued he's issued only 2 indictments of Israel in the course of now almost 3 years of genocide, and has made sure to balance that by issuing more indictments against Palestinians. You can potentially cut Khan some slack for not issuing any indictments relating to the crime of genocide on the grounds that this is a question being investigated, or rather being adjudicated by the International Court of Justice, and it will be much easier for him to do so if and when the ICJ determines that this is a case of genocide. But even then, the ICJ does not deal with individual criminal responsibility. Only the ICC does. And it can, and it does have plausible grounds to seek arrest warrants of a whole range of Israeli leaders and commanders for the crime of genocide. And I'm sure that if he were to do so, it would constrain the conduct of these leaders and commanders. And, it would, I think, be greatly beneficial. Now, just to get back to your question, of course, we don't know who the next prosecutor is going to be. And anyone who succeeds Khan is going to understand, that they are in Israel's crosshairs as well. But that was already the case with Khan when he replaced Bensouda. But nevertheless, one would hope, particularly at a time when the institution itself is under comprehensive attack by the United States, by Israel, and by some European leaders, that a new prosecutor will be found who can rise to the occasion and will understand that ultimately there is absolutely nothing he or she can do to appease the powerful, and therefore he might as well just do the job he was elected to do.
And before we move on, I wanted to remind people of a recent piece by our colleague, senior editor Maureen Claire Murphy, titled "Has Trump Torpedoed the ICC's Gaza Probe?" And in it, Maureen argues that the Trump administration appears to have dealt a serious blow to the International Criminal Court's investigation into Israeli crimes in Gaza. And in particular, she looks at how U.S. sanctions and threats against the court, as well as against Palestinian human rights defenders such as Raji Sourani, are designed to intimidate anyone seeking accountability for Israel's genocide and other crimes against Palestinians. So if people haven't read that, I encourage people to do so. And Mouin, you mentioned Fatou Bensouda, who served as the ICC's chief prosecutor before Karim Khan. She recently told Al Jazeera about the persistent efforts, apparently by Israel, of course, to bribe, blackmail, and intimidate her into halting the court's Palestine investigation, including, Israel apparently threatened her family. And you also wrote a recent analysis for the Middle East Council on Global Affairs titled "The Palestinian National Movement and the Challenge of International Law." In that, you acknowledge that Israel and its Western backers have waged a systematic campaign to undermine the international institutions where Palestinians have won, a modicum of recognition of their rights.
The ICC being a perfect example.
Exactly. And you talk about Donald Trump's effort to effectively replace the UN with his so-called Board of Peace. And in the same breath, you argue that Palestinians should continue to pursue their rights through these various international legal and diplomatic forums. Can you unpack that argument a little bit? What's the strategic value of these institutions for Palestinians? And what are their limits given, either veto power or intimidation and threats against prosecutors who could do so?
Yes, let me just first briefly address the issue of Fatou Bensouda. She was, interestingly enough, she spoke in The Hague, where she had been invited to give a talk by the Rights Forum. The Rights Forum is a organization in the Netherlands dedicated to addressing the question of Palestine on the basis of international law. And it was established by the former late Dutch Prime Minister, Dries van Acht. And I had the honor to be a founding board member of that organization. And, she's been out of office now for 4 or 5 years. There was a long article in The Guardian a year or so ago, which spoke about these Israeli practices of trying to intimidate ICC staff, bribe them, blackmail them, and so on. But this, to the best of my knowledge, is the first time that Bensouda has spoken out publicly and directly about this. And she speaks about people showing up at her house. Her security had taken a picture of the car's license plate. And when ICC security contacted the rental agency, it turned out that the two individuals who rented the vehicle had done so with Israeli passports. She talks about efforts at bribery, at blackmail, at intimidation, and so on. And as one individual told me, it seems there are things that she has thus far only said in private, that she is now beginning to state in public. And there are other things that she has not yet said in private that can be expected to come out in the coming period as well. So that in and of itself is, I think, a very interesting development. Now, getting back to your question, the point I sought to make is that we must recognize that the Palestinian struggle for freedom and liberation is a fundamentally political struggle. It's not a legal case that's going to be adjudicated by a judge or a court of law. It is a fundamentally political struggle that is going to be resolved on the basis that any other political struggle is. And I think a problem that with some people's approach to issues of human rights and international law and so on is they see these human rights reports that can be outstanding but change absolutely nothing. They see these rulings by courts and international legal institutions and international organizations that basically confirm the justice of the Palestinian cause, but they change nothing. And they kind of throw up their hands and say, well, we should ignore this arena because international law and human rights have done nothing for us. Whereas the point I sought to make is if you look at it in that narrow sense, yes, you shouldn't waste your time. But if you see them as dynamics that can contribute to the political struggle, they can in fact be quite useful. And the best example I can think of is in this case is the ICJ genocide case, where, as you'll recall, the genocide, for all intents and purposes, commenced on the 7th of October, 2023. It was already obvious, certainly by the end of the month, what Israel was up to. And you had a lot of people who perhaps were not previously committed to taking a position on the Palestinian question, people who were very concerned about, their careers, their whatever, who were looking on in horror, but were too terrified to say or do anything. South Africa brings its case to The Hague under the Genocide Convention. And in January of 2024, the court rules that Israel stands plausibly accused of genocide. And all of a sudden, the floodgates open, and it becomes perfectly legitimate and normal and acceptable to talk about genocide in the Israeli-Palestinian context, essentially no different than we would speak about it in any other context. And in this case, it's particularly relevant because for many people who perhaps are not very well versed in the history of this issue, they tend to look at Israel as first and foremost the international community's atonement for the history of persecution of the Jews in Europe and of the German Holocaust in particular. And Israel has, of course, very effectively used the Holocaust as a shield to deflect any criticism and accuse anyone who criticizes it of essentially trying to finish Hitler's job. Well, that shield is, because of this legal procedure, no longer available to Israel. And to a very large extent, we can now speak about Israel the same way we would speak about Myanmar or Rwanda or indeed any other state. And for those like you who are familiar with the relevant history, that is almost unthinkable political progress.
It is a remarkable change, but has come at an absolutely extraordinary price.
That's certainly true.
Yeah, we should have been able to speak about all of this many, many decades ago. In fact, Palestinians were, and some people were, but as you say, it has taken this genocide to produce that response. Well, let's talk, Mouin, more broadly about the situation in Gaza and the region. Now, we're just almost in June, and therefore it's almost 8 months since the start of the so-called ceasefire in Gaza. Nevertheless, Israel's genocide continues through direct bombardment on a daily basis, mass killing and the deliberate deprivation of food, medicine, shelter, and the basic means of life. At the same time, Nikolai Mladenov, the representative of Trump's so-called Board of Peace, is demanding the total disarmament of the Palestinian resistance as the price for Palestinians in Gaza even to receive food, medicine, and shelter in anything close to adequate quantities. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, Israel is escalating settler terror and ethnic cleansing while the Palestinian Authority continues to collaborate with Israeli occupation forces. What can change this dynamic? Palestinians have tried everything: unarmed civil resistance, armed struggle, negotiations, and as we were just talking about, legal action. Nothing has appeased Israel or its American, European, and indeed Arab sponsors. Doesn't that demonstrate that Palestinians cannot be expected to confront alone a genocidal occupier whose weapons, financing, and political support are global? In other words, what I'm getting at is we often focus on our discussions on what strategies Palestinians should deploy. And what I'm putting to you is maybe that's the wrong question. Of course, Palestinians do need strategies and are engaging in strategies, but I'm putting it to you that there is no sort of silver bullet Palestinian strategy that by itself can change the power dynamic. So what are your reflections on that at this point after almost 3 years of genocide?
Well, I do think that Palestinians on their own, without any regional or international or global support, are essentially fighting a losing battle against an Israel that is unconditionally supported by the most powerful state in human history, namely the United States, and by the West, and particularly the Europeans more broadly. But it has also never been the case that the Palestinians have been confronting Israel on their own. I think the fundamental challenge for the Palestinians has been, and in fact remains, that Israel's sponsors and allies seem much more committed to Israel than are the allies of the Palestinians committed to the Palestinians.
I don't mean to interrupt, Mouin, but I want to ask you, does that surprise you? In other words, we always knew the West, the EU, the Americans are committed to Israel. Were you surprised after 3 years of genocide, the depth of that commitment? Did you think that they would reach a breaking point before now?
I have been surprised, particularly by the very slow pace of progress in parliamentary democracies that have coalition governments, where politics is much more susceptible to change than in a country with, for example, a presidential system like the US, or for all intents and purposes, a two-party system like Britain. Because in a parliamentary democracy with coalition governments, where a few seats can make all the difference in terms of who's in and who's out of power, I think public opinion is more able to influence decision making. But having said that, we are also living in the plutocratic age, where politics is much less receptive to public opinion than it is to money, certainly compared to the late 20th century. So, you know, the pace of progress is agonizingly slow, but at the same time, we have to recognize the enormous progress that we've already made, and also to recognize that the progress we're making is becoming increasingly rapid, and that we therefore, by absolutely no means, should surrender or throw up our hands in despair, because I remain absolutely convinced that the progress we have made is not only irreversible, but also accelerating. Now, to get back to your question, Israel's allies have also always been much more committed to Israel than in the case of the Palestinians. So you go back to the Cold War, for example, you have this unconditional US and European support for Israel. And then you look at the Soviet-Palestinian relationship, and it was always dependent on, for example, not alienating Cairo, not alienating Damascus, using it as a bargaining chip with the United States for some other issue, and that has essentially continued, and that's going to continue, and we simply need to take that as a given, because the Palestinians, as important a factor in Middle East politics as they are not a sovereign and independent and powerful state for which is going to be taken into account the same way a country like Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Iran is. At the same time, I do think the Palestinians do have a fundamental responsibility and a fundamental priority to get their own house in order. If Palestinians cannot agree on a unified agenda, on a national agenda, a clear strategy, tactics, objectives, and present those to their regional and international allies, and more broadly to the world, of this is what we want, and this is what we are seeking to achieve, and this is what we're asking you to support, as opposed to one Palestinian faction seeking the assistance of a regional state in its rivalry with another faction. We're never going to be able to reach our potential. I mean, I'll give a good example. The movement to boycott South Africa drew enormous additional power from being embraced and sponsored and led by the African National Congress. Compare that to the BDS movement in Palestine, which is to a significant extent being either undermined or ignored by the formal Palestinian leadership. And you immediately see the difference. So the point I'm seeking to make is that a unified Palestinian leadership that is credible, that is capable of mobilizing its own people, that is capable of putting forth a clear agenda, not only to its own people, but to its supporters and to those on the sideline, I think would enormously strengthen the Palestinian struggle at an absolutely critical and existential phase of its history.
I can't disagree with a word of that. Of course, it's also about defining the problem, because I don't see the issue as being Palestinians divided. I don't think there is a significant Palestinian constituency that, for example, is opposed to BDS or even or to armed struggle. I think support for resistance is almost universal among Palestinians. They may differ about, the timing and the methods, and whether now is the time to engage in. Those are all legitimate questions, tactical questions. But I don't think there is a large constituency that agrees with the Palestinian Authority that armed resistance is criminal, or that, as Mahmoud Abbas says, security coordination with Israel is sacred. Yeah, to use his word, which is ongoing now. Even though they blow hot air, they still collaborate with Israel. This is a minority of a minority among Palestinians who support that view, but this is not internal, because that leadership, that Quisling leadership, is imposed on the Palestinian people, is funded, as we saw after the elections in 2006, we're going back 2 decades now, believe it or not, aid for the Palestinians under occupation, the ability to transfer money, all of those things was made dependent on the Quisling leadership remaining in place, as opposed to the leadership that Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza had elected, which was, of course, led by Hamas. So my point is that the inability of Palestinians to present a unified front and strategy is also a symptom of the denial of self-determination and occupation and their subjection to settler colonization, apartheid, and now genocide. So, I mean, it is, in a sense, a catch-22. But I make those points because I guess I want to sort of push back against a discourse that exists. I'm not suggesting it comes from you. I see this as a conversation, but a discourse that exists out there that this is a, quote unquote, Palestinian failing. But Palestinian leaders who are popular have for decade after decade after decade been routinely assassinated and murdered by Israel, something that continues while the colonial powers and later the Zionists impose a leadership on the Palestinians. So in a sense, I'm not asking you to, you may, of course, you can respond if you want to. I'm certainly not asking you for a solution to that. I'm just pointing out this sort of conundrum that Palestinians are in.
Well, it is a conundrum, and I'm not going to take issue with anything you said about the current titular Palestinian leadership. But Palestinians may be experiencing these challenges in a particularly extreme form, but they are hardly the first to confront them, and others have managed to successfully overcome them. And I think, part of the problem in the Palestinian political arena is that if you look at public opinion polling, the one constituency that has consistently been growing over the past few decades is none of the above, at the expense of all the established and new parties. And I think what is required, and here I'm not so much talking about, Abbas and Fatah and Hamas and the rest of the alphabet soup, but Palestinians need to find a way to overcome these divisions, to shunt to the side those who are invested in perpetuating these divisions for personal or factional reasons at the expense of the national interest and the national struggle, and essentially to reinvent the Palestinian national movement as a unified national movement that welcomes all and that is capable of mobilizing all on the basis of credible leadership and a credible program. And that, I think, without taking issue with the points you raised, is something that is missing today and something that would, I believe, significantly enrich the Palestinian struggle.
I just think about all the, like Ali said, the potential leaders that could be the ones organizing a national political movement. I mean, decades of assassinations of minor as well as major political leaders, or even hopefuls, people who could be the leaders of such a movement, are languishing and being tortured in prison, or have been assassinated, or have been driven into exile. Without also an international, legal or political or military mechanism to enforce international law and hold Israel to account and stop its genocidal machine in all forms. I mean, a new PLO could be born tomorrow, but what's to stop Israel from assassinating everybody?
Well, good point. And if I can just interrupt you, I mean, of course, the crucial difference between international law and law as we know is that international law is not self-implementing. It's not as if someone is accused of war crimes and then the police go to their home, bring them to court, and when they're convicted, they're put in shackles and sent off to jail. That's maybe the way it works for a criminal in a national legal system. But international law is ultimately a very political thing, and we need to recognize its fundamentally political character. and deal with it on that basis. How does it contribute to the political struggle? How does it obstruct the political struggle? And ask those kinds of questions rather than looking at it as a kind of, through, let's say, conventional legal analysis.
Yeah, I mean, without actual physical material enforcement, it's doubtful that that just international legal mechanisms can be
Yes, and
useful.
yeah, and you may not you, but there are perhaps viewers who may belittle these war crimes indictments against Netanyahu and Gallant, and now potentially against others on the grounds that they didn't change anything. Well, look at the political campaign effort that was invested to get us to this point. And you can't you can't sneeze at that. Those are major political achievements that have, I think, had a very positive impact on the struggle. I mean, look at Israel has suffered definitive, irreversible decline in its public image. There's no coming back from this. And it's not only because of its conduct, it's because of the political campaign to ensure that people are aware of its conduct. And one important difference between Israel and South Africa didn't give a damn what anyone thought about it. It didn't have to. It was a large, rich country with massive natural resources that the entire world wanted and needed. For Israel, public opinion is a strategic resource of the highest order. It no longer has that.
Even though I think the one of their foreign ministry wings or something just announced that they're pouring 20-30 billion dollars into propaganda
Wasted money.
efforts. Yeah.
Wasted money. And I do think I agree with you, Maureen. I often hear people sort of belittling the indictments at the ICC, are saying, oh, the ICC is never going to do anything. We get that. We're not naive about that. But these are indicators of a change. And what is frustrating for all of us is the lag between, or the disconnect even, between the sea change in public opinion in the West. We often focus on the West, I think partly because we are in the West, but also because we understand that that's where Israel's support is rooted. Without the West, Israel would cease to exist. And, you see the sea change in public opinion across Europe. Even in Germany, public opinion is not with Israel, but its government is fanatically pro-Israel and fanatically genocidal. In Spain, you see the government catching up with public opinion. Even in Italy, which has a very right-wing pro-Israel government, the government feels, if nothing else than for electoral reasons, a need to rhetorically pay lip service to Palestine.
Wants to stay in power.
It wants to stay in power. We know this is all sort of too little and coming way too late, but I think a point you make that is really worth holding on to, Mouin, is that to belittle those changes is to belittle the efforts that have been put into bringing them about.
Certainly.
And I think it's important that we not do that.
Yeah. Well, switching gears slightly, in recent days, there was yet another round of renewed optimism that the U.S. and Iran might be close to an agreement to end the war of aggression launched by Washington and Tel Aviv in February. But as we speak, of course, those prospects appear to be receding again, while Israel is escalating its massacres in Lebanon and Gaza and is working behind the scenes to sabotage any agreement. How do you read the situation with Iran right now? What has Iran demonstrated militarily and strategically, and how does its success, including its ability to control the Strait of Hormuz, change the regional balance of power, especially with respect to Israel? How do you see this?
Well, the problem with such questions is that we're dealing with a leader in the White House who has absolutely no clue what he's doing, doesn't know what his objectives are, doesn't have a plan to achieve whatever objectives he may or may not have. And then people like you and me are asked to make sense of this, which, is by definition almost an impossibility. Having said that, um, the intensified bombing and killing and destruction, particularly in Lebanon, but now also in the Gaza Strip, would lead one to believe that the United States and Iran are increasingly close to an agreement. But of course, that doesn't mean one is going to be reached, because we're dealing with if you look at the MAGA coalition, it has a significant anti-interventionist constituency. But if you look at the MAGA administration, it's dominated by the Israel Firsters and the Iran War Hawks. And we saw that a few days ago, where Trump was basically saying an agreement is imminent, then that it isn't, then, putting these silly juvenile social media posts with bombs on them and so on. I'd like to make perhaps two observations. The first is that, I'm far from the only one, but I have compared the war against Iran to the Suez Crisis, described it as Washington's Suez moment. And by that I mean is that you have a declining global power which launched a war primarily for the purpose of seeking to reassert its global primacy. And in doing so has come up against the limits of its own power, and is a moment which I believe future historians will look at as the moment when it became inescapable that US power was in terminal decline, certainly as far as being a global superpower. I think that analogy applies equally to Israel. From Israel's perspective, the war against Iran, the destruction of the Islamic Republic, indeed, the destruction or collapse of the Iranian state, was to be the final act of its several years long campaign, beginning in October 2023, in which it was going to achieve uncontested regional hegemony for a generation. It was supposed to be a 1967 moment on steroids. And instead, what we have here too, not only in Iran, but also in Lebanon, increasingly, Israel also coming up against the limits of its power. And in its effort to assert its regional hegemony, it has confirmed that it is incapable of achieving that. It hasn't even been able to wipe out Hamas in a postage stamp sized minuscule territory that it has controlled since the late 1960s, for God's sake. So how does it want to take on the entire region? And this, I think, is going to have massive strategic consequences in both the short and the longer term. The other point I'd like to make is that we now have had this ceasefire between the United States and Iran. I mean, what we have in Gaza and what we have in Lebanon has never been a ceasefire. You've almost 1,000 dead in Gaza since agreement was reached in October, and to even suggest that this is a ceasefire is simply obscene. Same, of course, goes for Lebanon. But U.S.-Iran has been a ceasefire, but the problem is that the status quo is unsustainable. And the reason I say that is because it doesn't solve the fundamental issues from Washington's perspective. Ending the shooting war doesn't achieve anything if shipping insurance rates are still in the stratosphere because there isn't a political agreement. It doesn't resolve the issue of a price shock increasingly transforming into a supply shock. And it's not just oil and gas, it's all the byproducts, jet fuel, fertilizer, and all the rest of it. And so the US essentially has two choices, both of which are unpalatable. The first is that it signs a framework agreement with Iran to formalize a ceasefire during which it will negotiate the various issues. And it's quite clear that Iran is not going to renounce anything that it was not prepared to concede prior to the war, and is going to insist on a lot more, particularly now that it has control over the Strait of Hormuz, which in my view is worth several nuclear arsenals combined. So that's the first option. The second option is to return to full-scale war. And here the issue is that this would require an enormous commitment of US resources, including ground troops, resources that the US in some cases does not possess, and resources that, even if committed, are unlikely to achieve much, and certainly not the objectives which Washington and Israel set out at the beginning of the war. And so given these two options, you see the White House almost like a ping pong ball flipping several times a day between these two, but it still seems stuck at a fork in the road. My concern is that you're going to get the Israelis and the war hawks seeking to convince the maximum leader in the White House that Iran is so weak, it's so desperate. Just one more massive bombing raid, and it will either capitulate or collapse, hoping that this will unleash a dynamic that will then lead to prolonged war.
I do think I want to get your reaction to this. We just have a minute or two left, Mouin, but I do think that at this point, the United States and Iran could come to an agreement.
Yes.
That doesn't mean the United States is a benevolent power in the region. It's still an imperial power that is seeking its imperial goals, but I think it could come to an agreement with Iran. But this is not a two-way negotiation. Anything that Washington agrees to has to be approved in Tel Aviv, and that's
or imposed on it.
Oh, exactly. And it's not that I believe the United States is not the most powerful party here. It is. Israel doesn't have independent power. The question is whether the United States is prepared to discipline Israel. At the beginning of the US-Iran ceasefire, we saw the United States was forced to step in and say to Israel, no more attacks on Lebanon. That lasted, if it lasted, a matter of days before Israel began escalating its attacks. Hezbollah, for its part, is continuing to defend Lebanon, but has restricted its operations basically to Lebanese territory rather than firing missiles into Israel. But Washington never followed up by saying to Israel, we told you stop, and that means stop. So, I think that's what happened here again. We heard a few days ago, a deal is very close. I don't believe anything the Americans say, but then we had Iranian sources coming out and saying, yes, we are much closer and a lot has happened. And we saw the Qataris toing and froing from Tehran, and the Pakistani chief of staff and so on. It looked like something was happening. Now it seems to be receding as Israel escalates its attacks in Lebanon and Gaza, because Israel doesn't want the agreement and Washington is unwilling, if not unable, to put its foot down. Is that a fair assessment?
Probably. The question becomes, when you look at this quite dramatic escalation in Lebanon and Gaza, is it Israel trying to scuttle a deal, or is it Israel fearing a deal and having one last go? But I do think Lebanon is absolutely vital to the possibility of any deal for precisely the reasons that you mentioned, Adi. The Iranians have made very clear, without a ceasefire in Lebanon, there is no deal. Now, the Israelis have always been very effective at inserting poison pills into these negotiations. And they appear to have said essentially, yes, we completely accept a total ceasefire, but we also retain the right to self-defense and to deal with any threat to our security. In other words, there won't be a ceasefire, and they will use that as a pretext to continue to intensify and to derail any U.S. Iranian agreement. So in that sense, unless Washington is prepared to not put its foot down, but put its boot on Israel's neck and say it ends completely and it ends now, the situation is going to remain extremely explosive. And as I think we can all agree, the chances of Washington acting that assertively in defense of U.S. interests at Israel's expense are not very large.
Well, thank you, Mouin. There's a lot more we wanted to talk to you about. We could go on a lot longer, but we've taken a lot of your time. You've been very generous with us, so we would like to have you back to continue the conversation. And just a reminder, of course, Mouin Rabbani, you are a non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. You are a highly informed analyst. I've been reading your work for more than 30 years. I was telling my colleagues, since you were writing in Middle East International in the early 1990s, which in the pre-internet days was the best source of analysis on what was happening in the region. And that stays with me after all these years. And you are, of course, the author of the forthcoming book, Gaza Apocalypse. Perhaps when it's out, we'll have you come back and tell us about it.
Thank you. I look forward to it. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you,
so much, Mouin. Yes. Wow. That was a great interview. Just so wide-ranging.
Yeah, another in-depth discussion that went by in I think we're almost an hour, but it just went by so fast for me because Mouin really does have a lot of depth of knowledge and a good all-round understanding. So it was very interesting and thought-provoking for me too.
Yeah. Good. Well, speaking of, facts on the ground and material realities here, let's bring Jon on and talk about Hezbollah's fight against the Israelis in South Lebanon. Hi, Jon.
Hello. Great interview.
Hi, Jon. Yeah. Thank you.
I have also been following Mouin for many decades.
As long as me or longer?
Just slightly less.
All right. It's starting to feel my age.
So are we. Jon, another, what is this, week 12?
Week 12.
Hezbollah's defense of South Lebanon. And just in the last, 12, 24 hours, Israel has declared all of South Lebanon basically a live fire zone. They've imposed these displacement orders on the people there. What are you going to be covering?
I'm going to be covering the resistance, and it's the resistance, again, defeating the Israelis on the battlefield and forcing Israel into the only thing it knows how to do, and that is carry out genocidal rampage against civilians who don't have anything to do with the fight. And just see them escalate because they got humiliated last week, as you'll watch over the next 40 minutes or so. They just turn it on civilians. It's exactly the same in Gaza. It's been exactly the same methodology for the Israelis for decades.
Yeah.
Forever. For their forever. So it's just, it's dark. It's dark.
I noticed something. It is dark in the in the sense that we're now almost 3 years into this, and the massacres have become so routine, massacres that would have been, stop the press events
Yeah.
a few years ago, and now, just like not even barely mentioned in legacy media. But I did notice something this week, is that one of the FPV videos from Hezbollah from the last few days, which I'm sure you're going to discuss, so I'm not going to say too much more about it. But I noticed that it got a lot more coverage than usual. In other words, I don't know if it was mainstream coverage. There might have been some, but even just, on social media and independent media, I noticed it was circulating far more than we've seen. So I don't know if that signals some kind of shift in perception or some other ratchet in Israel losing the narrative war as well. But what do you think, John? Did you notice?
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think
too?
that those images of the last moments of Israeli soldiers, which we come to know from the Russia-Ukraine war, I think has been Israel's fear all along. They can't hide this. The FPV drone, by definition, has a video that's produced by the operation, and you will see in my report several times where you have Israeli soldiers in their last moments looking like deers in the headlights. And I think that for Israelis, that's humiliation for them, and the whole world sees it. Whereas a lot of their battlefield losses, maybe in Gaza, didn't necessarily have that same, although there was many that had that same intimacy. I think there's just something about the camera being on the drone and the way that it operates that it just really shows the defeat. It shows their cowardice, and so I think that one this week from Bint Ishbael really did strike a chord. And I think it led to the escalation of genocide, and that those two being linked together is just such a devastating feature of this American-Israeli project.
All right. Well, on that note,
Take it away, John.
All right. So you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report on day 965 of Israel's genocide in Gaza and day 87 of Hezbollah's defense of South Lebanon. I'm going to cover Lebanon today at length, but let's start in Gaza, where on Tuesday night, Israel assassinated Mohammed Odeh, who is a longtime military intelligence chief and presumed chief of staff. He became the chief of staff after the assassination of Izzedine al-Haddad, who I reported on last week. Two chiefs of staff in a 2-week period Israel has assassinated outside of a war and in a ceasefire period, massacring them with their families and killing their neighbors. Odeh is from the Jabalia refugee camp. He was part of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 founding generation. He was a member of Yahya Sinwar's Majd counterintelligence unit that sought to root out collaborators and Israeli agents in Gaza in the years before the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades were formally announced from their emergence. In earlier years, he was a battalion commander in Jabalia, but he has a long history, military intelligence history, and was a critical builder in the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades, encompassing the indigenous weapons development program that, of course, was on display for the 2.5 years of resistance in Gaza. But he has been key in that weapons program and the development of the structure of the military force of the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 brigades, something that he carried on till his final days when he reorganized 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in the north of Gaza and took over as the Northern Division commander at that time after Izzedine Haddad became chief of staff. And Haddad himself had replaced Mohammed Sinwar, who was the chief of staff for a year before he was assassinated around this time last year. And Mohammed al-Deif, who was the chief of staff from 2002 to his assassination in 2024 in Khan Yunis. So 22 years of leadership from Mohammed Deif, who you can see in this image here, planning the October 7 attack. You can see the Gaza envelope on a map down there. Mohammed Odeh is on the right side facing the screen. Mohammed Deif's on the left side in the black. That's Abu Ubaidah beside him, and Rafi Salama, who is the Khan Yunis Brigade chief and top aide to Mohammed Deif. And so you see this real inner circle of the October 7th operation, and he was, Odeh was a key part of that group, that small group that dismantled the Gaza division and really shattered the myth of the Israelis as the intelligence, the myth of their intelligence and the myth of their capacity. And it's the military intelligence that was run by Mohammed Odeh that did that had that impeccable and voluminous intelligence on each Israeli position, on the movements of troops that they had watched for years in the Gaza envelope, in the Gaza division's movements, were all what was dismantled on October 7th in literally minutes, because of the preparation that Mohammed Odeh was overseeing. He also oversaw the critical counter intelligence raid that was foiled by the Israelis in 2018 in Khan Yunis, where they attempted to plant listening devices to try to get into the closed phone line in the tunnels. That operation was foiled, and he was a key role in that as well. Qassam said that he is our distinguished commander, and he left his mark in various fields of jihad and resistance, from the battlefield to military manufacturing workshops, passing through the command of the Northern Brigade and the command of the Weapons and Combat Services Wing. Then he, for a long time, with the Military Intelligence Wing. And he said, Qassam said, what a great journey he was on, rich chapters which will remain a beacon for generations. The ferocity of the battle and the intensity of the assault from which our people and resistance are being subjected to, and the Zionist rampage and savagery, are certainly the final chapters of the occupation. So that is a report from Gaza. We will go now to Lebanon and start with the maps that we always start with. And the maps are important today because Israel yesterday made the entire area south of the Litani River, the entire pink on this map, a free fire zone because of their failures on the battlefield. Tactical defeats turned into civilian massacres, and Israel has been bragging about this over the past few days, striking more than 150 targets in Lebanon yesterday, and 550 covering the 3 days at the beginning of the week. They have killed 3,269 people in Lebanon and injured almost 10,000, including, of course, the 125 paramedics and first responders, civil defense workers that were killed, many in grisly double tap massacres that were watched on camera, as many of Israel's crimes are. We can take a look at the next map because you can see the three main areas of the battle. This is Hezbollah's map from a couple weeks ago, but it covers the month after the ceasefire, or after the massacre that followed the ceasefire. So we're looking on the western coast there, Nakura and Bayada. In the center there, that's the Bint Jbeil province, and battles that we'll be focusing on today in that region. And then if you follow up the Galilee Panhandle there to the top, you have a considerable battle that has been waging along that front all throughout this war. And you can see the distribution of attacks in each of those areas, and those concentrations of attacks indicate both Israeli positions and Israeli attempts to advance, which are being thwarted for the most part by Hezbollah operations. Let's look at the next one. We have psychological operations here that began the week, and it was prescient for Hezbollah to put this out. It's directed at the Israelis, and underneath this sign that says caution or beware, and it's obviously a drone with the munition on it. The Israeli media quote was to the effect that these drones make the skies a death trap. And Hezbollah, of course, like Qassam, the military media departments are keen on the psychological operations directed at the Israeli public and directed at their own public as well. But this sign was definitely foreshadowed the week for the Israelis. Let's take a look at number 4. This was a pretty remarkable attack here. We're seeing right from the start assembly of the drone here that we've talked about. There's the anti-tank missile. I'm going to break some of these down after because it's moving pretty quickly. On the wall, it says, dedicated to the great and devoted people of dear Iran for your constant love and support. And from your brothers in the Islamic resistance, there we see the drone take off, and also to the martyrs of the Minab school massacre. So you're seeing this drone fly now over this road. And if you look off straight ahead in the distance, you see the dust of a Israeli military Humvee. And right about now, the Humvee sees that there's a drone coming, slams on its brakes. You can see the dust behind that and bails out here. And we're going to watch it bail out up a road. Clearly no plan how to handle this situation. The drone doesn't seem to be phased at all. It just simply continues at its same speed, hops over this house here, and the Israelis are now stopped and attempting to bail out of this Humvee. You can see 2 soldiers there, the one on the left doing the Superman. He's got his foot caught in the tire there, and you can see 4 soldiers. There's at least 2 inside. I think there's probably 2 more inside that we can't see, but they bail out. And they leave their fellow soldiers inside with no defense. Nobody tried to shoot at the drone. Nobody tried to escape and evade the drone. I blurred that section. If YouTube is watching this, I blurred that section where it showed Israeli faces, as we always do to meet community guidelines, but their faces were shocked that the drone was coming in, and it's a direct hit on that vehicle. And maybe unsurprisingly, no casualty report from the Israelis on that, where an anti-tank rocket exploded inside the back of a Jeep that has at least 2 other people in there. I think it's got 4, and then it's got 2 in the front as well. So let's go back and look at number 5 here. This was something that I noted here. You can see another fighter operating in South Lebanon with his fingers removed, the fingers from the pager attack. Those are even the fingers that were targeted because they made the pager. They made the, in order to turn off the pager from that page, you had to grab it with 2 hands. And so you can see, of course, working in explosives, you can lose your fingers in many ways, but these are clear pager attack results. And you have a fighter on the front line putting together the drone that just apparently killed several Israeli soldiers, although they haven't admitted to that. If we look at the next one, this is the warhead here. This is the PG-7VL that I've been telling you about, but it's good to see it, what it is, how big it is. And of course, it's the best single round RPG rocket. But it's still not as effective as the Yassin 105 for people who have been watching this program for years, because the Yassin 105 is a tandem charge. It has 2 explosive elements in it, whereas these RPG rounds just are single rounds. But this is the best of the single rounds, the most advanced of them. These are Iranian copies of the PG-7VL. And then one more, number 7, is the fiber optic spool. So this is the spool, the connection that tethers the drone. We've talked about this a bunch of times, but it's worth always repeating because it's devastatingly effective, that this fiber optic cable is attached to the drone and attached to the controller and is unjammable. It gives the controller immediate results on the controller in terms of guiding the drone. And it can't be electronic. It's not subject to electronic warfare in the same that the other drones that are running on radio signals are. So that is something that Hezbollah hasn't showed us this. I've shown you the 2 other times that Hezbollah has shown us these drones. This is the most they've shown us. You can see the 3D rail under his glove there. They've 3D printed railings to mount the weapon and to mount the spool underneath. So really, again, and these are clean, smart, effective, resilient weapons because the supply chain is resilient. The parts are used in many different ways. They're 3D printing certain parts, and really the number of these drones being in the thousands is not surprising, and they're highly effective. The Israelis claim that these drones are coming from from greater than 20 kilometers distance, but I don't think we have seen that yet. That spool doesn't suggest a 30-kilometer range, but the Israelis seem to think that the drones go from incredible distances, and they always report on more drones hitting than actually were fired by Hezbollah, which is something that we'll encounter on the program today. Let's look at number 8. You can see the full assembly of it here. It's a little bit hard to see because it's black on black here, but you can see the warhead without a fuse. And Hezbollah has been very, the operational security surrounding the fuse and detonation system of these. I know people have asked about this, but Hezbollah is not showing us this. And so even when they give us a build like this, you can see there's no fuse on the nose of the RPG warhead that you're looking at there. And then underneath, it's difficult to see, but underneath the warhead is the spool. It angles down and it runs a thread for the 15, 20 kilometers, if that's indeed how far it is. The 10 kilometers are the smaller spools, and it just runs that line. And unless that line gets cut, you have direct low latency response to all the commands. And that's why Hezbollah has been able to improve week on week in remarkable fashion. And you're going to see that on this show as well. And just one more, just wanted to show this still of these guys bailing out and leaving their 2 to 4 other guys in the back to fend for themselves. They're not jumping out here to shoot at the drone or to try to knock the drone down. They just bailed, and that's going to be a theme of this program. And it's also this shot right here is the shot that the Israelis have been afraid of for the past 80 days of this war, that this drone footage showing the final moments of these soldiers would become a major propaganda coup and also a morale, a real shot to the morale, whatever the opposite of a morale boost is. So just wanted to show that picture. Now let's look at number 10. This is the operation. This is the commander of the 401st Armored Brigade, Meir Biderman. And he's saying here in an interview on Israeli television before the war, he says, "We'll come here with many surprises for Hezbollah. They are weakened. Their firepower is less than before. And you can see this in the quantity and accuracy and effectiveness of their strike." And what we're looking at here is the newly positioned 401st Armored Brigade headquarters that they have moved down from a higher ground that was, we'll see after this, that had been hammered for weeks, and they fled that position. Hezbollah followed them to this new position, and this house that they're occupying here is the command center for the 401st Armored Brigade. And you're going to see a full casing of the joint here, full reconnaissance flight around to see. There you see a soldier out on the porch here. They're identifying that. You can see he's going to notice the drone, and he also is going to run away and not look out for his fellow soldiers, doesn't close the door, and the drone flies right through the door into the command center of the 401st Armored Brigade. You can see it happen again here. This operation severely wounded the commander of the 401st Armored Brigade, and he is still in critical condition. And this is the second drone now is going to circle around and come back. This is a 3-drone operation. It's going to circle around back here and aim at this ammunition truck that you can see there. Takes out the ammunition truck, and as we have come to expect in recent weeks, the 3rd drone does a battle damage assessment of the previous drone, and you can see the ammo truck burning over there. You can see the window there blown out of the 401st headquarters in that. And then the drone here is going to circle back around, and he's going to aim at a Namur troop carrier on the ground here. And I think you're going to see the netting catch it right at the last minute. So there, and then now this is Hezbollah using Israeli television footage to show the removal, the medevac of the colonel, the highest ranking officer taken off the battlefield by Hezbollah in this war. And he himself, that's him saying the same line again, that that Hezbollah is not what they used to be. And then he finishes it off by leaving on a stretcher because of the effectiveness, accuracy, and quantity of Hezbollah's strikes. So he kind of walked into that one. We can take a look at the next slide is the still of the drone entering. You can see the soldiers to the right and straight ahead, and you can see the computer systems that they're operating. Now, the 401st Armored Brigade is, of course, infamous from its time in Gaza. Hind Rajab was killed by the 401st Armored Brigade, but everything in northern Gaza, the genocide in northern Gaza from 2023 to May 2024 was led by the 401st Armored Brigade. It's their tank brigade. And then in May 2024, the 401st moved down to Rafah to ethnically cleanse Rafah and escalate the genocide there. They moved back up north for the general's plan in late 2024 for the ethnic cleansing of the north. And then also in the north, ethnically cleansing Jabalia, Beit Lahia, and Beit Hanun during Operation Gideon's Chariots. The previous commander of the 401st was killed in Gaza by Qassam in an operation in October 2024. And that is when this new commander, Meir Biderman, took over. So long history of crimes by this particular unit. Let's look at number 12, because again, it's just situational aware, basic military soldiering, situational awareness to flee, sure, but close the door. Just look at the next slide. They just leave the door wide open and cost his unit dearly for that decision. So back-to-back operations, Israeli soldiers, I guess cowardice, not really a better word than that for what this is, and leaving their troops vulnerable. And then Israel's response to this cowardice is to escalate the genocide against people who don't have anything to do with this fight, instead of turning it on Hezbollah. Let's take a look at number 14, because you're going to see in these next two how that operation came about. This is just up the road in Rashif. That was in Debil. This is in Rashif, just down. This is north of Debil. So the Israelis pulled back. That was the first drone hitting a fuel tanker, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, a heavy tactical vehicle. There you see, again, the second drone is now doing the battle damage assessment of the first drone's strike before he heads in and takes out the second tanker. Presumably, those are the two tankers that they have in this position. To take them both out is significant. Now we're drone 3 now. Drone 3 is going to point out the two previous burning 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fuel tankers that are used to fuel the tanks and vehicles to carry out these operations. Again, you're seeing the netting in this town. Ineffectual netting draped over positions, just identifying where soldiers are. This is the third drone, picks up and hits this Jeep. And then the fourth drone is going to come. This is all one after another. It's going to hit a D9 armored bulldozer. So 2 𝐓𝐶 fuel tankers, a Jeep, and a D9 bulldozer, all destroyed, because that weapon destroys all of those. And while they're doing that destruction, they're also carrying out intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, gathering data for the next strike. So that's why these weapons have been so multi-layered in their effectiveness. Let's look at number 15, because this is a few days later. They're going to fly back to this base that is in Rashif, that is the 401st Armored Brigade base. And they're showing here in the inset the operations I showed you last week against a Jeep, against a tank, against another Jeep. And they're showing you on the ground there that that's where those Jeeps were. And for the most part, they're gone. This is showing essentially, this is all a reconnaissance flight. They're going to fly right up to this window because this is where the base was. We saw them strike them. We saw them strike this house multiple times up in that red window. And then on the roof here, we watched them knock off technical gear that was, here in the inset. They're showing it to you. So this was last week, you'll all remember. And they knock out the network connectivity of the base. Again, these are smart targets. The targeting is as wise as the build of these drones, and they have developed week over week each time here. And you can see this is where the abandoned vehicles that were previously targeted were. And this base has been effectively, this forward position has been emptied, as you can see, leaving nothing but their bed sheets hanging out over the neighborhood. So that was what this drone flight over sees that they're gone and tracks them. Oh, there's the husk of the tanker that's destroyed that you're seeing in the bottom left there, the two tankers. But they're on in these guys, and here they're going to fly off into the distance because they're just going to follow the 401st Armored Brigade to their next position. And they did. So that's how the operation came about. And you can see the layers of it. Last week's operations leading to the next week's operations, leading to pullouts. And that's what we're seeing, pulling up bases. The Israelis aren't reacting to Hezbollah's operations by increasing the ground force to fight face-to-face. They're increasing the airstrikes on civilians. They're not interested in the face-to-face fight, and they, whenever they reach those fights, they pull back from them like they did in Hadassah just yesterday. We'll break that down on next week's show. But the fourth failed attempt by the Israelis to reach this, to reach the village of Hadassah, repelled by Hezbollah again. And the rest of the time, we just see these ghost towns where the goal of the Israelis is just to destroy the villages that people have been driven out of. And if they stayed, they would be massacred. So that's their choice. Ethnic cleansing. And they're moving the genocide now to South Lebanon because this is a distinct people in South Lebanon as well. And the goal is to destroy Shia South Lebanon. And so the genocidal rampage is now into a second country. Let's look at number 16, because this was the night before the operation on the 401st. This is from the Israeli spokesperson's unit, so I didn't have to blur any faces because they've been blurring faces for 2 years because they know they're criminals. There's the drone strike, hits them, and this is the medevac of the combat camera officer. And if we look at the next slide, I have put together what they were saying. So it's so she says it's a drone. The other person says, "It's a drone, bro," and the other person said, "It's a drone for sure. I saw it." And then smack. Everything goes silent, and then the next thing you see is someone over top of the soldier saying, "Are you breathing?" So that 15 seconds gives you an idea of how much time the Israelis have, how much situational awareness. 4 soldiers out here looking for the drone, no sirens, no indication that it's coming, and it hits directly on the target, wounding 3 severely in this strike the night before the operation on the 401st Armored Division. So that's 17, right, Tamara? Okay, 18 here. We're going to just get into a whole string of attacks here. This is in Bint Jbeil. This is a quadcopter, again, carrying the RPG anti-tank warhead that you saw. Pretty certainly, particularly when Hezbollah showed us that build, that these are mostly all fiber optic connected drones. They deliver that one right into the exhaust of this Merkava here. And that could lead to a mobility kill for sure. You hit the engine like that, it could lead to a mobility kill. And just a note on this, when the vehicles are damaged, the Israelis have whole units out in the field that's job is just strictly be mechanics. And one of those mechanics was named Noah Hamburger, and he was killed the other day while working on a tank that had been hit. And his mother said that his dream was to work with drones, and now he's been killed by a drone, is what his mom said. He was a tank, like I said, a tank mechanic who would work on an operation like this. When you have a drone knock out the engine, mobility kill, the tank can't move, you're probably going to have to replace much of that engine or parts of that engine. Depends, I suppose. But that's a direct strike. Let's look at 19. Again, going at the fuel tankers. This is a really important target. You cannot execute a war without logistics. You know, that goes back to the first days of warfare. And you're going to see here, they're going to hit the tanker from behind as it looks like it had just been filling up that tank, but basically becomes the gas station. And you can see in the next slide, looks pretty similar to that slide, that it's a gas station, and that is how they fuel up their tanks that burn through tons of fuel. And if you knock them out in the same villages, in the same sector, we just watched 3 of them go up in flames just in a couple of days. So really strong targets here. The tank targets are lower probability. These, when you hit a HEMTT, when you hit a Humvee, when you hit a D9, when you hit an excavator, you have a 100%, virtually 100% kill rate. When you hit the tanks, it's significantly less than that. And they have adapted to that reality on the battlefield. So let's look at 21, because these are also high profile targets that we watched this week. The attacks on the Iron Dome system that is supposed to knock these drones out of the sky. And the Israelis bragged in the beginning of May that 27 drones had been shot down by the Iron Dome. But Iron Dome doesn't seem to see this one coming. And this is in Shlomi, and you can see how the launcher on the left is empty and the launcher on the right is full, and they target the full launcher. So there's a $3.5 million hit that you just watched right there between the launcher. It's called a missile firing unit. The launcher does the same. So yeah, significant hit on that Iron Dome. But let's look at the next Iron Dome, which was shown to us yesterday. This is one of 15 missile firing units that have been targeted, along with 3 radars so far in the battle, according to Hezbollah's field reports. We have seen 4 on camera, and you're going to see all 4 of them in the next 30 seconds or so. So this is the one circling back here on it, and direct hit. Again, you can see that had dispensed a number of interceptor missiles, Tamar interceptor missiles. Each missile is $100,000, 20 launchers on the in the battery, so $2 million per. That gets hit. And let's look at the next one, is of the 3 that were before that, because there was 3 operations in a 24-hour window 2 weeks, week and a half ago. So this is the one we just saw, but the next 2 are the 2 previous ones. So we've now seen 4 Iron Dome units be hit on camera just in the last 2 weeks, direct strikes. And this is the earlier one from those strikes. Again, these are on the Israeli side of the border. You see the border fence there. And then you see the units and direct hits on the units. direct hit on that unit as well. So let's look at 23, because now we're going to do some excavators. Also an excellent target, 100%. This is truly 100% kill rate, because these just blow up. They have no armor. They have the massive fuel tank in the back, and they're just destroyed. There's nothing you can do about those. This is an excavator strike in Der Serian, which is up at the top of the Galilee Panhandle to the northwest. Direct hit. And 24 is same river valley. You can see the riverbed. It's the Litani riverbed. And again, these excavators are doing nothing but destroying homes and setting up military embankments to try to protect Israeli tanks. So these are high quality targets to hit. They might not be as social media friendly as the tank hits, because everybody seems to like the tank hits, but in the way they're fighting this battle, these are truly the targets, and they've been doing that significantly. We saw at the beginning they were hitting tanks with a significant, like 80% of the FPV ops were against tanks. Now they're under 40% against tanks, and they're taking out all of these vehicles that are difficult to replace. There's one more, 25. Are we on 25 tomorrow? Yes, 25. This one is flexing the fiber optic and skimming it right along this berm that they're building and blowing it up. Again, they're building this base inside Lebanon, and they need these excavators to do that engineering work. 26 is another HEMET, but this is a different type of HEMET. A HEMET is a heavy tactical truck. It's an 8-wheeled truck, and so they have many different configurations. We saw the fuel configuration, which essentially turns it into a gas station. We saw last week, I showed you ones that hit power stations, and here they're going to hit the base station cabinet of a mobile wireless antenna tower. So you can see that, you can see 4 or 5 antennas there, and that's on the back of the HEMET, and they just drive it right into the brain. The base cabinet, the base station cabinet, which is what you're looking at, that is the brain of the entire network connectivity, and they take that out, and that is another important hit. So 27, that was in Taipei. 27, this is in Manara. This is on the Israeli side of the border, and this is an older attack. This is from early in May, but they see even early in May, they're skipping all of the tanks, all of the armored vehicles, and they're hitting here what looks to be a HEMET that's actually a wrecker. So it would be essentially the tow truck that carries, because there's another wrecker, there's a Nomer wrecker there right beside it. So here you can see on the back, you can see the wrecker, and that no longer exists. And we saw the previous HEMETs, they get hit by an anti-tank weapon, they explode, they burn into flames, they explode into flames and burn immediately. So these are off the battlefield. If this war goes on for months and you're taking out 6 HEMETs a week, it has a significant logistical impact on the Israelis. Although the Israelis don't seem to want to fight anyway, so it might be a good excuse for them to run and hide. Let's look at 26, because I still keep, even though I believe these tank operations are lower probabilities, I'm still putting them all in there because the Israelis clearly believe the tanks are targets because they're putting netting on them. Here's a strike that maybe is aiming for the turret gap, but also that's the driver's compartment right there. When it comes down again, if you look on the right-hand side as it's coming in, you'll see the periscope underneath the turret there, up in the top there. That's the periscope for the driver, and the driver has that whole space in front of him is the engine, which is why hitting with an RPG directed at the engine is not a high percentage move, because the Merkava has the engine in the front. Most tanks have it in the rear. So you see that hit on the driver's station. They hit them a couple of times, which indicates that they believe that there's potential weakness in that spot. That was 28. 29, we're going to chase a soldier here in this operation, again at the Manara position. This is near Hula in Lebanon. You can see it's the Israeli side of the border where it's a massive staging base. You can see on the left, he's attempting to run to that shelter. That's a mobile bomb shelter, and he's trying to run to it. It's a race. They probably got the warning, air hammer incoming. That's what the Israeli soldiers announced before everyone starts to panic and run around and lose their situational awareness. So here he is. You can see him attempting to hit to get into that shelter, blast shelter. We don't know at this point the result of these operations, because an anti-tank weapon, to detonate an anti-tank weapon into the ground like that isn't going to be super. It's going to put the charge into the ground. But we have seen, and the Israelis have talked about, fragmentation sleeves that are on some of these. So when it explodes, the shrapnel comes out. And the Israelis are talking about that. So when we see an operation like this, the Israelis seem to believe that there are fragmentation warheads. And if we were to see fragmentation warheads come out in number, that's when it's real trouble for the Israeli soldiers. Is this 30 here? Let's do 30. Yeah, perfect. This is aiming at a Namur hatch. And again, you see they've completely covered the Namur in netting there, but the netting is up against the tank. So it's not stopping. It's still going to detonate in the same place that it was intended to detonate on that's the hatch, the commander's hatch on the Namur. So I guess everybody's learning on the go here, and the Israelis are slow to find a solution. But this netting is at least more appropriate than draping it across the neighborhood. That made absolutely no sense. Let's look at 31, another tank here. This is in Markaba, also up in the same area. These are all organized by geography, basically. And again, that's the driver's compartment that you can see his periscope there. But if that is aimed underneath the turret gap, that is a very effective place to hit. And that's what it looks like to me that they're attempting to do on these ops. Look at 32 is against a truck on a base inside Israel. This is in Miskaf Am, and you can see the wall, the base's wall, and there are also the high points. And these are the same high points that Israel used all through the security. You can see it chasing down the truck here, coming up from behind and hitting the back of the truck with an anti-tank weapon. Again, that makes it a mess. We didn't hear casualties in this one, but you can basically guarantee that it is, unless it was a dud. So again, lying about their casualties, even though we're watching them with our eyes. Number 33 is hitting tactical vehicles. This Land Rover here, again, you see, we showed this last week. They hit the same site where they put a little bit of netting over top as if it's like a roof. It just doesn't work because the drone can go all the way to the ground. They don't come straight down. It's going to circle back around here. That's a light on in that building. And he's going to hit this Land Rover here and destroy a command vehicle. Those Land Rovers are usually used by, once in field, are used by commanders more often. And we'll look at the next one, 34. This is ATV in Bayada. And again, this Bayada base is basically completely empty. If we remember from before, there was positions all over that looked like this. And this ATV, tactical ATV gets blown up for sure. That's a 100% kill on that vehicle. 35. This is the artillery base that we've been reporting on sort of week after week. This is on the 15th of May. It's doing a flyover of drone number 1. There's going to be a couple drones here. But flying over the base and showing that this base is completely empty. All of these berms that you're seeing, that's where all the tank positions were. This is an artillery, the 213th Artillery Brigade position, and all of these areas where inside the roads were completely covered with vehicles. There's one vehicle left over here. They've got a Merkava covered in a tent here, and they strike this, and you're going to see drone number 2 comes in, and it's burning. So I'm not saying that the tanks are impervious. They clearly, we've seen a number of times them in flames from these hits if you get them in the right spot. But this is just showing the complete uprooting of that base. They pulled the base up, and these previous attacks, that shows where they were. And this is going to be another excavator taken out. So we've seen just on this show 2 forward positions that are confirmed to be emptied. Pull up stakes here. They're going to hit a tent here in that camp as well. And then one more 36 here. This is thermal imaging capacity on the drone. A couple of nights before this, Israel said they were going to move their operations to the night because it was too dangerous in the day. And Hezbollah shows up immediately with a night vision capability, picks off 2 soldiers here that you're going to see. They'll show you these 2 here. One goes one way and one goes the other. But the Israelis thought that darkness would keep them safe, and it clearly did not. And for Hezbollah to use that, basically, when the announcement was made, this is basically the next night after that announcement. So the first opportunity for darkness, Hezbollah flexed its thermal capacity that the Israelis denied they had. 37 just shows you the still of that soldier there that you can see. And one last one from Iran. The Iranians shot down another MQ-9 Reaper yesterday over the Persian Gulf, they said, over their airspace over the Persian Gulf. This is one of 30 plus Reapers, minimum 30 Reapers that have been downed by Iran during this war. So another $30+ million. You can see it being essentially vaporized there in those in that footage. So I just wanted to bring that. Not going to get too into Iran because of the just ridiculous diplomacy of the United States that doesn't match anything that the Iranians are saying, but we will stay on that story as we always do. And this has been the Resistance Report for day 965 of Israel's genocide in Gaza.
Well, that was absolutely incredible, John. Extraordinary images, extraordinary analysis. And I just wanted to step in and say thank you for doing that this week and every week. For the last 965 days, we know that you're doing this every day round the clock, even though we tell you to take a break and you don't listen to us. But you are providing really extraordinary analysis that is appreciated by all of us and by so many people around the world who are watching now and who will watch the segments as they always do every week. So well done, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Incredible. I mean, just there was, I guess, an announcement by one of the defense ministers just a couple of days ago saying that they're going to pour like billions of dollars into, research and development to try and stop these drones. I mean, they're really scrambling for.
Yeah, there's not really good solutions for this, and that's why.
No. I think last week you talked about how the Ukrainians were talking about a revolving barbed wire, sort of like, it looks like a kitchen utensil sort of thing.
That would cut the fiber optic cable. But the thing is that the Israelis went to the Ukrainians to say, you can give us all this advice about drones, right? And they made a big, a big show of
Yeah.
them communicating with each other. They had meetings about how to deal with the drones, and they come out of that meeting with like, yeah, maybe you can get a rotating razor that might snip it. You can get shotgun shells for your rifles that, you know, burst apart and give you a greater chance of shooting it out of the air. But it's limited.
Yeah.
You can't calibrate any of the systems that Israel uses for air defense. If you calibrate them for a drone that's that big, every seagull that flies by is going to trip the alarm. So,
you know, watching this, you know, we're all watching this, but I'll tell you who else has got to be watching this is the Pentagon. And they will know that if their troops set foot on Iranian soil, this is what they'll face. No question about that.
By orders of magnitude more, right?
Yes.
Whole divisions that are set up and prepared for years with this stuff. Hezbollah introduced this fairly recently. Iran has this capability, locked down, and I don't foresee a ground invasion.
Yeah, but if they did, you know, even to, you know, if they think they're going to seize an island or whatever they might do, this is going to be waiting for them. And Iran is an enormous country. They have plenty of land and resources to train. And of course, you know, we use the word drone rather loosely. I think maybe, John, people might want some more explanation about this. Like that MQ-9 that we just saw Iran shooting down, we call it a drone, but it is, you know, almost the size of a Boeing 737. It is an enormous aircraft flying at very high altitude, whereas these first-person drones are tiny. They're you know, this big. They're about a foot across, and you can literally pick them up because they're tiny. So we're talking about a vast array of objects that come under the name drone. So we haven't seen, and also the Shahid drone, which Iran uses for covering distances, you know, attacking targets hundreds of miles away. Again, those are fairly large. I think if we think back a few weeks to when you showed us the Iraqi tribesman picking up the Lucas, the American copy of the Shahid drone, you could see it's still a pretty big thing that sort of took up most of the bed of a pickup truck. Yeah. These FPV drones are something else altogether, and because they're so small. And, you know, the pieces, the image we saw there, you know, it's made basically of carbon fiber tubes that are sort of the thickness of drinking straws. So all of this readily available. So I'm going to make a prediction here that we can, you know, come back to. But I believe that if it's just a prediction, I don't have any special intelligence information or anything like that. No one should get the wrong idea. But I think that if the fighting resumes in Gaza, and I mean fighting, not massacres, because they've never stopped, but fighting, meaning the resistance begins to target the Israeli occupation forces again, I believe we will see these drones in Gaza.
Yeah, we saw them a couple times in Gaza. They used them on October 7th to great effect, knocking out as part of the blinding operation when they took out the network connectivity of the fence. They did that with drones.
Yeah, they used them, of course, on October 7th. We saw them dropping. We saw them using them in a slightly different way. I mean, you'll correct me, John, you're the expert on this, but they were dropping munitions from fairly high altitude on Israeli tanks. And then on October 7th, we saw them dropping them on, you know, a machine gun tower.
Machine gun towers.
Yeah. So, which means they have the drones, but we didn't see them using them in this manner.
No, not as suicide drones, because they didn't have they were precious.
Yeah.
They would use them multiple times. But they did capture Israeli. We know that they spoofed and captured Israeli drones, because I showed you a bunch during that time. When you can see what they're quadcopters. They should be called quadcopters. They're propellers, different than a drone. But we saw in Gaza, you can see what it looks like when it gets shot out of the sky, a drone. And of course, 𝐄𝐿 and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 shot many out of the sky, but they also had pristine ones, which were spoofed. And so you take over, 𝐶𝐿 takes over the feed, and the drone thinks it's yours.
Right.
So it flies and will literally land in your hand like a bird. So
But
they have those drones.
the Israelis, of course, were and are using quadcopters in Gaza.
Oh yeah.
But not to fight the resistance as much as to terrorize people, to shoot people, to terrorize them. And of course, the iconic last moments of Yahya Sinwar were captured by a quadcopter, and he was killed by a quadcopter. So Israel has been using this same technology for a long time, but now those who are defending against Israel, those who are resisting Israel, have their hands on the same, if not improved, technology.
Yeah, I think the Israeli military would say that the development that happened during the Gaza war was the use of small drones to case buildings. That was something that had never happened before. To use the drone to go floor by floor up into buildings, that they used that to devastating effect during the war. And also just criminally shooting people who are walking down the street, chasing people. Just think of the number of Nora's news reports that included quadcopters, saying the worst things, telling people, playing sirens, screaming children, just every form of terror that you could use the device for. Israel figured it out. And then now they're on the other end of it with no answers for this. And it's escalating significantly. More soldiers were killed last week than at any other point in this battle. So we're trending in a direction of more losses for the Israelis.
And of course, there are ways that Israel can stop it. It can stop the genocide. It can stop the occupation. It can stop its apartheid. It can stop the invasions of its neighbors, and it can stop being a colonial Zionist entity. It's not hard. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, Ali, you wanted to highlight an article by our friend and contributor Abu Bakr Abed that he just wrote for Palestine Deep Dive.
Yes, it's really an extraordinary piece, and I know many people are reading it. If you haven't, I recommend it. It's at Palestine Deep Dive, and it's called "Survival Outside Gaza Was a Lie," and it's really incredibly profound, in some ways sad, in other ways uplifting reflection that Abu Bakr wrote after a year since leaving Gaza. He left Gaza to Ireland in April of 2025. A year has gone by very quickly. It seems like a lot longer for so many reasons. But Abu Bakr talks in this piece about the difficulty of adjusting to what he calls a completely alien culture, and at the same time being totally consumed by what is happening back home. And he said, there are so many incredible lines in this. He says, the genocide was continuing at the time. He's talking about when he went to Ireland. I had experienced the whole horror from the beginning, and at some point I stopped feeling sane. The only time I felt my old self was for a brief moment when the October 2025 ceasefire was announced. But the process of adapting to Ireland has not been easy. In fact, adjusting to my new existence has been utterly torturous. Speaking a foreign language all the time, meeting and trying to connect with new people, and endeavoring to understand a new and alien culture have exhausted my emotional energy. In normal times, this would have been exciting, but with the weight of my trauma-marked brain and fears of what might happen to my family and friends still in Gaza, it has been a struggle, to say the least. In reality, my mind and my soul never left Gaza. It was just my physical body that moved. There was a brief moment at the start when I felt like I had been taken from hell to heaven, but the initial euphoria quickly dissipated. You know, Abu Bakr certainly has gone through a lot and achieved a lot, and that's true of all the students and all the young people who have left Gaza, gone to scholarships to Ireland, to Italy, to France, to the UK, to others who've left Gaza. Many of them are friends and colleagues. And I'm sure that, obviously I can't speak for them or know what they're going through, but I'm sure that a lot of what Abu Bakr wrote about will resonate with them. It certainly resonates with what I've heard people saying. But Abu Bakr's perspective is unique, and we're extraordinarily proud of him and of all the young people, the students from Gaza who have continued to live, to study, to graduate. It's graduation season now, and I know many who have just graduated or who are about to graduate, and their families are rightly proud of them, and they are the hope of their families who are still in Gaza. So, and they are, many of them now facing a future that is uncertain, of starting a new life without the immediate prospect of being able to rejoin their family, of having to find a way to move forward psychologically, emotionally, socially, but also in terms of, how to live, how to make a living, how to support their families. People in Gaza are still going through the genocide. There's no question about it. But those who leave, like Abu Bakr, are only partially relieved. They still suffer deeply the consequences and effects of this ongoing genocide. But this is a truly remarkable piece of writing. Survival Outside Gaza Was a Lie by Abu Bakr Abed, and I just want to recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, he's such a great writer in a second language too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, very deeply, obviously personal essay, and he really articulates what survivor's guilt looks and feels like, and all of these contradictions, the relief that he's not suffering from malnutrition and direct hunting by the Israelis, and also the just really searing pain of being away from everyone and everything that he's ever known and loved, and watching them still have to navigate this genocide. It's a remarkable and really beautiful and quite painful piece, and so I want everyone to be able to read it too. And let's take a look at the website. We've published a bunch of new reports in the last week, and as well as news items and analyses by our colleagues. Tamara, can we bring up the EI website? There we go. Right there is our weekly roundup of the live stream from last week, so you can go in and share that and see all of the sources and a nice summary of all the segments there. There's a new feature that I read from by Malik Hijazi about the ongoing Nakba, which is just beautiful. Give that a read there. Yeah, Ali, what have you been?
Yeah, the piece
reading
by
this week?
Anna Maria Mongiardino is really, really interesting because we don't talk enough about Latin America, and Israel has had a long involvement in Central and South America. During the 1970s and 80s, Israel was directly involved in the genocide in Guatemala and in other countries, training
Argentina,
death squads, and so on. And of course, in Argentina, during the dictatorship of Pinochet, Jews were persecuted by the dictatorship as leftists and communists, and Israel did nothing. Israel, which claims to protect Jews, did absolutely nothing to help Jews being persecuted by the dictatorship. On the contrary,
they sent weapons.
Yeah,
right?
it supported the dictatorship, which
Mm-hmm.
also gives the lie to Israel's claim that it is there to protect Jews. There's a long history of Israeli involvement, but it's ongoing. And one of the vectors that Israel attempts to shore up or expand its support is through Christian Zionism. And of course, that's been a strategy in North America and in the United States, where Christian Zionists have been the major base of support for Israel. But it's also the way that they're trying to establish new footholds and grow their support in Latin America. And so Anna Maria Mongiardino, that's what this piece looks at. So it's really, really interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I apologize. I meant Pinochet, of course, was in Chile, but I meant Argentina specifically in terms of the dictatorships of the 70s. So
exactly,
just to correct myself there.
And of course, the Palestine month in pictures from Maureen, that was published. I think we talked about it last week, but again, I'm always encouraging people to go there and look at the gallery and read the news roundup essay that Maureen writes. And to make this all happen is because of you, our viewers and our listeners and our readers. Ali, who do we have to thank this week for hitting that donate now link at the top right? Or going to the links down at the bottom here under the YouTube.
Yeah, well, we want to thank everybody who's watching, listening, reading, sharing, helping us to spread this work, which we do because we believe in it, and we know you believe in it too. And it is hard work, and I'm so proud of all of our colleagues and all of our writers and contributors around the world who work really hard to do the best work possible. And we can only do it and sustain it because of people who are watching and listening right now, and who read the website and who decide this is worth doing. And so that's what sustains us. That's how we can show up every day for Palestine, is by so many of our readers and listeners and viewers showing up every day for the Electronic Intifada. And we really appreciate that. And so I'm going to thank, let me get to my list. Actually, I'm going to say a few people made donations during the live stream. So thank you, Naomi, Marion, Amshar, and Bill. And you can do that if you want to right now by going to the Donate Now link on the website, or the links in the YouTube description. And a few other people who have made gifts recently are Carl, Samir, Robert, Charlotte, Roger, Jim, Doug, Shazmin, Judith, Josepha, Gregory, and Joseph. We are grateful to each and every one of you. And remember, only give if you can, if you can afford it, and that way you also share with people who can't, because all the information we do is always free for everyone. There will be never be a paywall or a compulsory subscription in order to access everything we do. We do it for everyone.
Indeed, we do. Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you to everyone for donating and keeping this publication vital and vibrant and ready to take on whatever fights we have to take on to keep this coverage going. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank, of course, our producer and director, Tamara Nassar. Thank you, Tamara, for everything that you do behind the scenes for this live stream. And of course, everything that you do in other aspects of the work at EI. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you to Ellie Gerzon, our social media production. Thank you to Pierre Loisel for radio production. We're on about 24 radio stations across the country and around the world, and more are being added all the time. So thank you to Pierre for that. Thank you to every one of our colleagues at the Electronic Intifada, of course. Thank you to all of our contributors and listeners and viewers and readers. And on behalf of myself and Asa, John, Ali, and Tamara, thank you all. We'll see you next week.